All right, so there's that big word again, atherosclerosis, and Dr. Community is wondering how that breaks down. So I'm just going to keep exposing you to these concepts until you begin to see those connections. So, and everybody learns in a different type of way. So I have many different diagrams to show you the same point, and which is basically that atherosclerosis kind of leads to all the trouble that we're talking about and the things that we want to avoid. Okay, so again, I'll just review that. High blood sugar is when you have a lot of blood, a lot of the sugar that you eat in your foods or that get broken down from the starches that you eat, those sugars are floating through and they're causing damage to your arteries. Okay, that can lead to diabetes. And you remember with our graphic there that diabetes is something that is connected with heart disease as well. Another thing about the blood or the problem with heart disease is that when you have all of the sugar and the salt and other proteins floating around in your blood from your diet, okay, and they're clogged through those clogged arteries, like what we saw in the very last or the worst of the four artery examples, then the blood gets really thick, okay? And that's how we get blood clots or people who are prone to having blood clots, all right? So a person who has thick blood generally has like a low amount of the good cholesterol because there's a good cholesterol and a bad cholesterol, but they have a high amount of the bad cholesterol, okay? So thick blood can be caused by high bad cholesterol, all right? And then also, smoking can lead to thick blood. All right. So, a person who smokes a lot is going to have thicker blood than a person who doesn't. And thick blood is a problem. Why? Because the thicker the blood, the harder it is for it to push through this tiny little space we have here in damaged arteries. Okay. Thick blood is even hard to push through a wide open space that has no damage. Okay. But usually, the person who has the damage is the one who also has compounded upon that damage the problem of having thick blood or what we call hypercoagulation. Okay, so hormones too, when you're on your cycle, or if you don't have your cycle anymore but you're experiencing some fluctuations in your hormones for other reasons, you may be a person who has thick blood as well. All right, moving on to lipids. Lipids, again, are referring to oils and fats and cholesterol and basically the stuff that we really want to try to avoid when we're eating, but find it difficult to avoid because they taste so good. Okay, so sugar, salt, and fat have that in common, that they taste good, and we have become accustomed to enjoying that flavor and the taste that comes from oils and fats. Okay, but I'm here to tell you that they lead to high cholesterol, high bad cholesterol, not the good cholesterol. Okay, so what you want to do is be in a position where you can improve your good cholesterol but decrease your levels of bad cholesterol. Okay, triglycerides are also something that are pretty that are considered a lipid and that lead to heart disease, and they are referring to how much sugar and how much alcohol you have in your diet. So if a person has a lot of alcohol in their diet or a lot of sugar in their diet, you know, those of us who eat candy all day long or always have to have a little piece of candy going or a little piece of chocolate or hard candy, those people who have to have that constant level of sugar going probably have high cholesterol, I'm sorry, high triglycerides in some type of way. All right, so cholesterol is about fats and oils, triglyceride is about alcohol and sugars. Okay, so all of this does lead to blocked arteries. Blood pressure, high blood pressure. I've talked about that some, but I want to drive home that point again, that if a person is experiencing high blood pressure all the time, then they are experiencing damage to their arteries. Why? Because that increased pumping speed from having high blood pressure causes the arteries to be torn and the inside lining to be damaged and destroyed because of the high force of the fluid that's being pumped through this pipe. So if you think of it like a pipe in your house where the water runs through your pipes to your sinks, then you would think that if for some reason a high pressure was to, or higher than normal pressure was to begin to come through those pipes, then the pipes could burst from that pressure. Okay, so you see that sometimes with the type of damage that you would see in a person who has high blood pressure, a tearing of the arteries or a destruction of the arteries, particularly around this blockage area that you have here. Okay, and you know what? All that pressure against those fatty deposits and those what we call thrombi or thrombus, they will sometimes push the pressure, will push those loose and cause clots to go free floating in your bloodstream. And then the worst thing about a clot is that sometimes the clot can clog up a place that's near your lung, okay? And that's called a pulmonary embolism. Or that clot could clog up a place in your leg, okay? And those is when people get those emboli or those embolisms in their legs. Okay, those leg blood clots, those are a real problem and can be life threatening. Okay, or they could cause a stroke, okay, where they go up to your brain and cause a blockage in your brain. All right, so high blood pressure is a problem and is not to be taken lightly. It's called the silent killer because so often people are not aware of what's going on in their vessels. They don't feel that on a micro level. They don't feel these little things happening until it's too late. So it's important to be thinking about this all the time. All right, so fast heart rate or hyper or tachycardia. All right, if you ever heard the doctor use that term with you, well, I'm going to tell you something that's not well established in the literature, but I do notice in my patients. African American women have really high heart rates. They have very high heart rates, fast heart rates, okay? That could be connected to stress and hypertension. If they have high blood pressure, it makes very much sense that their heart is going to be pumping faster to pump all of that blood through their system. Okay, sometimes those heart rates are irregular and you will see that they don't follow a regular pattern. Okay, and some people refer to that as palpitations, or they'll feel like an uncomfortable feeling with their heart rate. This too causes damage to the arteries, okay? So it's something that we want you to think about. And look at that heart rate when you're doing your daily blood pressures. Pay attention to what it is, okay? And which range you are falling into. Are you in the high? Are you in the low? Okay? All right, so atherosclerosis. Everything we talked about leads back to the concept of atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries. Okay, so if you have hardening of the arteries, you are at risk for blood clots. You're at risk for a condition called angina or angina. And that's when you have these periods of shortness of breath or a tightening in the chest because you are not getting good blood supply because your arteries are blocked, okay, and in certain percentages and in certain locations. All right. Angina can eventually be a sign that you're heading into the heart attack range because heart attack means that the blockage here got so bad that you could not get blood past it, and so that area of the blood vessel died basically. Well, it's called a myocardial infarction. That means that the blood vessel got so blocked off that it basically could no longer receive blood supply. And guess what? Blood supply is how you live. If your heart is not able to pump blood to all the vital organs of your body, including liver, pancreas, kidneys, adrenal glands, brain, if you're not able to get blood supply to those areas, then you suffer a heart attack or a stroke and the potential for death. Okay? So there it is, atherosclerosis. All right, so now we're going to move on to a new concept, still in part one, talking about African American women's health. Diabetes, okay? African American women have the highest pre-diabetes rates. Pre-diabetes refers to having a diabetes or blood sugar level of 110 micrograms per deciliter. What does that mean? It means that you're walking around with a blood sugar that's a little bit higher than average, okay? And so I don't mean that you personally are. It is possible that you have a very normal diabetes or blood sugar rate right now. It all depends on what happened in that first blood draw that we did. It would tell you whether or not you have a high blood sugar. Okay, and if you have questions about that, please call the research team. And if you don't know already, we'd be happy to share that with you so that you can know if you're someone who's considered pre-diabetic. Well, we're going to talk about now how you get it. How do you get diabetes? Okay. Well, we do know that there are several factors that play into diabetes. Okay, it could be part of your biology, which means that you could have inherited the risk or inherited the genetics for being at risk for diabetes. That means if your mother or your grandmother had diabetes, then you have a high likelihood of developing diabetes at some point in your life. Okay, how soon you develop it is something that you can help control. Okay, but it's possible that despite all of your best efforts, that you could eventually still get diabetes. But hey, wouldn't it be better if you were 85 years old before you develop that as opposed to 45 years old? Okay, think of all the quality years that you can have from not having to have a life with diabetes for so long. And we do know that we can put off the onset of diabetes by taking care of ourselves and doing healthy behaviors. Okay, so psychology plays into it a little bit too, though. Okay, that means, and I'll show you or give you some examples of that in a minute. But behavior, your health behaviors also play a role. Would you believe that society plays a role? Yes, society does play a role. And society is a part of your environment, but there are also factors in your environment that play a role. Obesity. Obesity refers to your BMI or your body mass index. It is not an opinion. It is generally something that you can see directly on the scale. Okay, so it's a hard number. You either fall into that category or you do not. If you fall into the category of obesity, then you are someone who is now at risk for getting diabetes. Okay, it's plain and simple that there is a direct connection between obesity and diabetes. Of course, there are other factors that have to play in for you to actually develop diabetes, but if you are obese, you have increased your odds of being a person who will get diabetes. If you need more information about whether or not you are considered obese, then contact the study team. If you do not know already, we'd be happy to discuss that with you. Family history. Okay, we mentioned that before with genetics, that family history plays in. Worry. There's the psychology piece. There's a lot of evidence to prove that a person who does not feel that they have control over their lives, or a person who worries a lot, or a person who spends a lot of time feeling anxious about things that are coming up, those people have a high rate of the risk factors that go along with diabetes. Now, what do I mean when I say risk factors? I mean the things that set you up for a disease. All right, so that means that you've been exposed to something that could potentially lead to a disease. All right, risk factors. So worry can be a risk factor for diabetes. Diet. That makes sense, right? Based on the little piece of the lecture we had about atherosclerosis before, diet is definitely a way to affect your blood vessels and it's also a way to expose you to more sugar, salt, and fat. Okay, diabetes is basically too much sugar in the blood, all right, an excess amount of sugar floating around in the blood, all right. The body is built to have for you to digest your food, and then eventually all the food clears your bloodstream by way of your intestinal tract, all right. So your intestinal tract is supposed to do the job of clearing all of your food away from your body, all right. But people who have diabetes have too much sugar, excess sugar, still floating around in the bloodstream after the meal. Okay, so they just have, or they're walking around with sugar floating around in their blood, and that's not normal and can irritate the lining of the vessels the way we talked about before. Diabetes and heart disease, they're like cousins. They kind of go hand in hand. They're related to one another. Okay, and I'll tell you why a little bit more about that later when we talk about the heart. But diabetes and heart disease kind of go together like peas and carrots. All right, inactivity. That's the same thing as being sedentary, and that's the same thing as being having low physical activity. All right? So when you're inactive, you actually set yourself up for diabetes because it's easier for food to sit around or your blood sugar levels to be high. There's a relationship between being inactive and developing belly fat, which is also connected to diabetes. Okay, so things are lifestyle is connected to illness, because when a person has a sedentary lifestyle, then they are setting themselves up for illnesses that play on that. Smoking. There's smoking again. See how smoking is connected to diabetes. It probably has something to do with worry as well. And it probably has something to do with the thick blood situation that we talked about before as well. Okay? So look at all those factors that go along with it. Sleep is in there. People who get poor sleep are at risk for diabetes as well. So sleep, we'll talk a little bit more about that with healthy behaviors later on, but that's a behavior that will definitely set you up for poor health. And alcohol. Alcohol, we talked about that before, is connected to certain types of coping, and those could be part of psychology and how people are coping with having stressful lives or having something that they are worrying about. All right. So see how of those constellation of factors, there's depression. Depression would be something connected to worry, possibly, and a psychological thing. But guess what? There are a lot of people who have diabetes who are also depressed, and vice versa. Lots of people with depression also have diabetes.